Welcome back. In tonight's edition of The Issue, the gender pay gap, IPA adjunct fellow Georgina Downer and CEO of the Australian Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Yolanda Vega, join me. Now, Lisa Wilkinson really, well, I shouldn't say she started it off because I think women have been talking about this for a lot longer than Lisa Wilkinson, but she did spark a big debate in this country about the gender pay gap. Do you acknowledge it's a big problem?
I think it is a little bit of a problem. I actually don't think it's a really big problem. And I actually think that the Lisa Wilkinson incident, if for want of a better word, I mean, that wasn't an incident that actually was about the gender pay gap. That was about Lisa Wilkinson asking to be paid the same amount as Carl for doing less work. He was doing a few other shows. He also gave Channel 9 all his social media account, ability to promote
So he gave
Channel 9.
exclusivity,
He did give it exclusivity. Lisa wasn't prepared to do that. Yet she wanted the same amount of money. Now, no one could disagree with equal pay for equal work, but she was not asking for equal pay for equal work there.
Yolanda?
I think 800,000 for the difference is a little bit extreme, and to some degree, I do agree with Georgina because we don't really know the exact story of what occurred in there, and we don't know the negotiations that took place, and we've only heard one side of it, and that was the channel saying, both of them have different responsibilities or provide us with different times. Nevertheless, if you are a woman in this country and you do the same job as a man, the data shows us that you will not be paid equally. So whether it's Lisa or whether it's the barista or whether it's a school teacher, it's a fact. Women in this country still don't have equal pay.
And we do know that this has kind of hovered between 15 and I understand 19% in the last few years. That's the gender pay gap difference.
Correct.
So how do you solve it?
Well, there's a variety of ways that we can try to change it, and sadly, if we look at the international numbers, some are claiming it's going to take between 70 and 150 years for equality. I don't buy that. I think...
Why not?
Well, because wherever there's a will, there's a way. If we have the policies and we introduced the gender pay gap, equal pay into Parliament 32 years ago, if this government or any other government, whether it's local, state or federal, are serious about making sure that that legislation is adhered to, they will put people in positions to allow for the monitoring of that. And when people, companies, organisations, small businesses don't pay equal pay to women for the same job as they do, then they should be punished for it.
What sort of punishment would you think is appropriate?
Well, I think, first of all, if we start at the top, if you give a CEO a KPI, guaranteed they're going to change that in their organisation, because at the end of the day, it's less money in their pocket if they don't commit and adhere to their KPIs. When it comes to small businesses, I understand that there are issues. Nevertheless, if you're doing the same job, you must get the same pay because you're getting the same final product or outcome. What we should do about it, how we can find these people, is difficult to ascertain because the differences could vary quite dramatically. Nevertheless, everybody pays superannuation to all of their employees. That data tells us what the differences are. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have that information. So it could be the ATO, or it could be the superannuation bodies, or it could be the WGEA or another watchdog that says, hey, you guys have 12 months to get your act together. If you don't, we're going to start fining you.
Georgina, what do you make of that idea? I imagine that the idea of fining companies for not paying equal pay would not be something you're into, but I'm not sure.
No, and I would be very nervous about mandating any I guess, reporting requirements, because I would be pretty concerned about the red tape that would impose, especially on small businesses. But I would just say, to Yolanda's point about the gender pay gap in Australia, the 15% figure is actually more about choices. So women tend to be employed in lower paid professions.
Is that their choice?
Well, they tend to study, for example, if they go to university, they tend to study humanities or education, whereas men might study law and business and engineering
Sure, but what Yolanda
degrees.
is talking about is the same job for the same work.
And no one would agree that if you do the same job, you should be paid differently based on gender. No one would agree with that. But the 15% isn't about doing the same job and not getting 15% difference in pay. The 15% is about your average female full-time wage versus your average male full-time wage. So I agree I think there is still a small wage gap in Australia, but I think the 15% is reflective of the fact that women do make different choices and we drop in and out of the workforce for the pure biological reason that we're the ones who have kids. You can't change that.
We can't change the fact that we have kids?
No, we can't. But we can change who we decide to marry to make sure that if we do want to have kids, that they take 50% of the responsibility. Just like when you start up a business with a friend, you need to know that they're going to take 50% of the... It's a business deal at the end of the day. In regards to what Georgina just mentioned, if we look at the amount of females that are today graduating out of university with a law degree, we see that there are actually more women graduating.
That's right.
We now have more women with PhDs than ever before, and there are a lot more than men. And yet, if you look at some of the data, it shows that a man will earn the same amount with a BA compared to a woman with a PhD, even though they've got 10 years more of study. So even in the law, where they're coming straight out of university, instantly women are given between 15 and 18% less than their male counterparts. So I don't buy the argument.
Yeah, what
that
do you
it's
say to that, Georgina?
choice.
Because I wonder about that too.
I'd find that pretty hard to believe. I mean, I actually did do a law degree and I was a graduate lawyer and we got paid the same. There was a graduate salary we were offered. I did articles of clerkship. I mean, you know, possibly across very different law firms you might get that type of trend, but certainly the experience I had at the one law firm, you were all offered the same salary, and then as you progressed, you know, based on performance, you got different salaries. So whether that was because women were opting out of full-time work, which often happens when you have children, that does, I understand, impact the amount you do get paid. But again, that is biology too. Women are the ones who give birth, and
so should women just accept that their biology means they're always going to earn less?
Well, some women choose not to have children.
But I think...
so is that the choice?
You can't.
Seems like a very
you can't change our biology,
choice.
though, Patricia. You cannot. I mean, we are always going to be the ones who have the children. So necessarily, we're always going to have at least.
So that means we always have to
accept
accept a lower pay?
No, I don't think we have to accept a lower pay, but we have to accept the fact that we are going to have career gaps, which will impact on things like the amount of superannuation you have at the end of your career. Because if you've only worked 40 years as opposed to 60 because of gaps in your career, I mean, that's just the reality, isn't it? Well,
in terms of accumulating wealth, but in terms of how much you are worth to an employer, I'm not so convinced.
Well, it's difficult though, isn't it? I mean, if for example, I've had 3 children and I've taken out of a sort of 15-year career 5 years, so I've only actually worked 10 years, and then a male counterpart has worked the full 15 years. Should he be kept back to the same level as me despite having worked for 5 more years? I mean, these are very, very difficult decisions that employers
Isn't
need
it
to
also
make.
about ability and merit, which I know you're into?
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's not just about chalking the years on, it's about what you can offer your employer and what you can do today and what your worth is.
But as you progress through a career, you are building your skills, your networks, your ability to work with colleagues. And if you've missed 5-10 years of that career, you're just less experienced, ultimately.
Sure, but
so, Yolanda, what do you say to that, that biology is part of this problem?
Well, it is. However, we're making assumptions from day one. I've had people ring me, people that have small businesses that headhunt I can't say no because they're a client, is what they're saying. So their client rings and says, don't send me a girl that's 25 to 35 years old. I don't want to see them because I know they're going to get pregnant and they're going to leave me and I can't afford it. But this is the issue. As soon as you're female, if you go into a law firm and let's stay connected to that because you're experienced at it and the figures are very obvious and the data is there, as soon as you walk in, they're automatically going to judge you because you have ovaries and therefore you are worth less to them now and in the long run because you may procreate one day. That is the basic biology issue that we have, not only here in Australia but worldwide. We have expected behaviours, and according to those expected behaviours, women will procreate. They will then stay home with the children and they will take care of the children. Based on that alone is where the discrimination, and they're all assumptions, because many of my generation never had children and we still got the same discrimination.
But do you think that women who do have children should get treated differently then to women who are childless?
No, absolutely not.
No, well, that's what I mean, the assumption.
But the problem is that we're starting with the wrong assumption already.
OK, so your way of solving it is, I suppose, more onerous reporting and a watchdog. Do you think that would solve it? I mean, it seems like potentially a lot of red tape as well.
Well, no, I don't agree that there's more red tape. And as I said, we already have that data. There's no more red tape. There's no more need for new organisations. The data is already there. We already look at it. The ATO makes sure that you pay your taxes every year. So why can't they just add that one little list in their automated software and say, these people are not paying equally? We'll send them a little letter.
We're running out of time, but Georgina, could you live with that extra column?
Well, I think that's... I think there would be some major issues with that, because you would not necessarily be looking at the substantive elements of each individual job. You'd be looking at someone's tax return, and there's a very sort of generic, I guess, description of what the job is, and you'd be sort of comparing these, I guess, job codes rather than the substance of what people are actually doing.
But couldn't it help if you want to actually resolve this issue and not talk in circles for the rest of our lives for 150 million years or whatever it is? I'm exaggerating, but really, I have daughters. I think we all think about this. I don't want them paid less.
No, I absolutely do not want my daughter paid less for the equal amount of work.
And I don't want her to be seen as a giant womb either.
No,
I want her to be seen for her brain, right?
No, but I've taken a time out of the workplace, and I certainly don't feel like I've been seen as a giant womb. But I have, through the options and choices that I've made, I am probably paid less than contemporaries who haven't had children or are men who just don't have children.
And you're okay about that?
I'm okay because they were the choices I made, and that, you know, you always have, I guess, toss-ups in life, whether you do one thing or the other. There is always an opportunity cost. But I do think that one of the major problems we're facing in Australia is the cost of childcare, and it does mean that there are women who say, well, it's actually not worth my while going back to work or working full-time, and we have some of the highest cost of childcare in the world, and the red tape imposed on childcare providers. Some childcare workers are spending 30% of their time filling out forms rather than looking after children.